Target is 5 clicks out. Final checks.
Roger that, sir.
Gear up. We drop in 2.
The coin was at the bottom of the drawer. Declan Merritt had packed 31 years into 4 cardboard boxes, and he had gone through every drawer twice before he found it. A challenge coin worn smooth on the edges from years of handling. The kind of worn that only comes from being picked up and set down thousands of times, from being carried in a pocket, through enough deployments that the metal remembers the weight of the hand. He held it up to the light from the window. One side a trident, the other side 3 lines of text, small and precise. The engraving still sharp because it had been made later than the others. Added after, Sierra 7, Christmas 2024, 0 casualties. He stood there for a long time. Outside Fort Bragg was going through its morning routine. Trucks moving, voices carrying across the parade ground. The sounds he had heard every day for 3 decades and would never hear quite the same way again after today. A thing can be ordinary for years and then in the space of a single morning become something else. Something that belongs to a version of your life that is finished. The sounds don't change. You change and the sounds become documents. Merritt set the coin on the empty desk. He sat down in the chair one last time, and he started to talk. 31 years. That's what the certificate on the wall had said before he took it down and put it in the second box. 31 years of service, a cabinet full of commendations, deployments to places that don't appear in press briefings. He had led men into 7 countries across 3 decades. He had made decisions under fire that he still turned over in his mind at 3 in the morning, measuring them against what happened and what might have happened instead if he had chosen differently. He had carried those decisions the way operators carry everything quietly without display, filed away in the part of the mind that stays alert even in sleep. He had been right about most of them. The one he had been most wrong about didn't involve enemy combatants or faulty intelligence or equipment failure in the field. It didn't involve any of the things that usually fill an after-action report. It involved a 15-year-old girl with a rifle and a scratched hand mirror that her father had given her on Christmas morning, 3 years before the night she used it to save 11 men. It happened in 90 minutes on a mountain in Afghanistan. Christmas Eve 2024. He has thought about it in some form every single day since. December 24th, Bagram Airfield, 2200 hours. The weather briefing had been almost insulting in its language. The meteorologist was 23 years old. First deployment still carried the look of someone who genuinely believed that if the data was good, the outcomes would be manageable. He said the words moderate winter storm activity with a straight face and a pointer and a slide deck that had been prepared with real care. Outside the briefing room windows, the Hindu Kush was disappearing into white. The mission itself was straightforward on paper. A congressional aide named Garrett Winslow had been taken by a Taliban-affiliated faction 6 days earlier during a diplomatic assessment tour that had gone badly wrong in ways that were still being investigated. Intelligence had located him at a compound northeast of their position in the mountains. The window for extraction was closing. By morning, he would be moved across the Pakistani border, and across that border, American forces could not follow. 15 to 20 hostiles. That was what the packet said. Merritt had run harder operations against worse numbers. He briefed his team, 9 operators from SEAL Team 9, all experienced, all men he had served alongside long enough to trust in the ways that actually matter, and the mood in the room was focused and professional. Compound layout, entry points, guard positions. Thermal imaging would be degraded by the storm, but they had worked with worse conditions than this. The team knew the plan. The team was ready. Then the CIA liaison stepped forward and said there would be 1 additional asset attached to the mission. Merritt asked for a name. The liaison said Sierra 7. He asked for a file. The liaison handed him a folder. Most of it was blacked out. Large black rectangles where operational history should have been. A document that told him almost nothing except that someone had decided he didn't need to know. The Chinook lifted off at 22:47 hours into wind, already pushing 30 knots in building. The aircraft shuddered, climbing through the first 1,000 feet, twin rotors, working hard against gusts that had been strengthening all evening. Inside the cargo bay, the team sat in the practiced stillness of men who have done this enough times that the discomfort of cold air and vibrating metal is simply background noise, something the body accepts and the mind ignores. Merritt went through the tactical display one more time. Compound layout, entry points, thermal positioning. He was halfway through his 3rd review of the insertion point when the loadmaster tapped his shoulder and pointed toward the rear of the aircraft. He turned. She was sitting at the very back of the cargo bay. He would remember this image for the rest of his life with the clarity that certain images carry when they mark the beginning of something you didn't understand until later. The way she was dwarfed by the tactical gear stacked around her, the dark braid pulled tight under a watch cap that was slightly too large, the rifle across her lap, a TAC-338 in .338 Lapua Magnum, a weapon capable of reaching out beyond 1,500 meters in the right hands, built for a shooter with the patience and skill to use what it offered, nearly as long as she was tall. She was adjusting the scope turrets with the focused, unhurried movements of someone running through a pre-flight checklist they have run many times before. Not nervous, not performing awareness of being watched, just working with a particular concentration of someone whose mind is fully on the task. She looked like she should be worried about a chemistry exam. Merritt walked to the back of the aircraft. She looked up when he was 3 feet away, brown eyes steady as the hands. The expression of someone who has already accepted what is coming and wants only to confirm the operational parameters are understood. He looked at her for a moment. He turned around and walked back to his seat. That was his first mistake. He pulled her file up on the tablet. The CIA had sent what they were willing to send, which was almost nothing. Name Maya Calloway, age 15. Asset designation Sierra 7. Specialty extreme long-range precision fire in adverse conditions. 6 months of intensive training at an agency facility following recruitment. The physical description confirmed what he had just seen. The operational history was almost entirely redacted. Page after page of large black rectangles. One line had survived. Either by accident or by design, he had never been able to determine which, and he had thought about it often enough that the uncertainty had become part of the memory. Field simulation accuracy 97.3% across 23 live condition engagements. He read that number twice. He did the rough math in his head. 23 engagements meant this was not a training exercise statistic. 23 live condition engagements at 15 years old meant someone had been putting her in the field for a while. He put the tablet down. He told himself he was keeping that information to himself to maintain team focus. That introducing a piece of data like that about an asset the team had already formed opinions about would create more confusion than clarity mid-flight. That operational cohesion required stability, and stability meant not upending the team's assumptions 40 minutes before insertion. That was what he told himself. The truth was simpler and less flattering. He didn't want to admit that the agency might know something he didn't. He had been doing this for 31 years, and he had earned the right to trust his own judgment about people and situations, and his judgment about the girl at the back of the aircraft was that she did not belong there. Acknowledging that he might be wrong felt like something he would need to account for later, and he was not prepared to do that accounting on the flight in, so he kept it to himself. That was his second mistake. Briggs had noticed her the moment she came up the ramp. Petty Officer Garrett Briggs was the best close-quarters operator Merritt had ever worked alongside. Fast, decisive, genuinely calm, under fire in the specific ways that separate operators who have genuinely processed what they do from operators who are still performing it. He was also a man who had never been wrong in his own estimation about anything significant and who expressed this confidence freely and often. He deployed it now. Did someone's kid get lost on Take Your Daughter to Work Day? Laughter, not universal but enough. Taggart, Petty Officer Dale Taggart, quieter than Briggs by nature but cut from similar cloth, in his assumptions leaned over and said something that Merritt didn't catch over the engine noise. The tone was clear enough without the words. Maya didn't look up from the scope adjustment. She didn't shift in her seat or change the pace of her work. She continued with the same steady focus as before, and when she finished the adjustment, she set the rifle across her knees and looked out the small window at the white nothing rushing past. Her lips moved once very slightly, not reading something, not talking to herself. The private movement of someone in conversation with an absence. Merritt saw it. He said nothing. That was his third mistake, and possibly the one he thought about most afterward. Not because speaking up would have changed the tactical situation, but because she heard it. She was 15 years old about to fly into a kill zone, and she heard grown men laugh at her, and the person in charge looked out the window. There are things you learn about a person in the minutes before a mission that no file can tell you. The way their hands move when there's nothing left to do with them. Whether they scan the environment or find a fixed point and hold it. Whether they're managing fear or managing focus, because those two things look similar from the outside and feel completely different from the inside. Whether the stillness in them comes from training or from something older and less categorizable. He found himself watching her without meaning to. Her hands were genuinely still. Not the performed stillness of someone working against nerves, the real stillness of someone whose mind is already organized and quiet and pointed at what is coming. She looked out the window without watching it. Somewhere else. He had seen that quality in men who had lost people they loved. Men who were doing what they were doing, partly for the living and partly for the dead, carrying both at the same time the weight of the second, sometimes larger than the first. He didn't know why she was there yet. He thought he understood the situation. He was wrong, and the wrongness would cost him. He found out the full shape of it 3 weeks later from an agency contact who had known Ray Calloway well. Master Sergeant Raymond Calloway, Delta Force 22 years. One of the finest sniper instructors the American military had produced in a generation, a man who had trained operators across 2 branches of service, and who had in the process developed a pedagogy that went beyond technical skill into something harder to name. The men who came out of his courses didn't just shoot better. They understood at a level most shooters never reached what shooting was for. The judgment behind the trigger, the weight of the decision, the difference between a shot that ends a threat and a shot that ends a life, and the fact that those two things are not always the same event. He was the kind of figure whose reputation traveled in the spaces between official records carried by the men who had trained under him in conversations that happened well away from briefing rooms. People who had worked with him described the experience in different words, but always landed in the same territory. Brown, Ray Calloway made. You understand that the technical skill was the smallest part of the job. Mastery of the rifle was the price of admission. Everything that mattered came after that. What you did with the mastery, who you were when you had it. Maya had grown up inside that understanding, the way children who grow up inside anything absorb it not as a lesson, but as the shape of the world. She had grown up on military bases, moving with her father's assignments, learning things in sequence that other children her age were not learning. While her peers were learning algebra, she was learning mil-dot ranging. While they were playing organized sports, she was learning how to account for the Coriolis effect at different latitudes. Her mother had died in a car accident when Maya was 7. After that, Ray channeled the grief into preparation. Not as a cold substitution for love, that had been one of the things Merritt had needed to understand when he finally learned the full story. Ray Calloway loved his daughter with the completeness that fathers who have lost something irreplaceable love the things that remain. He prepared her because the world was genuinely dangerous, and he knew exactly how dangerous it was, and the best thing he could give her was the ability to navigate it. The hand mirror came on her 12th Christmas. He gave it to her at their house in North Carolina, showed her the technique he had developed, explained the principles behind it. A mirror can create a false target for an enemy sniper. It can signal an aircraft when radio fails. It can check a corner without exposing your face to the space beyond it. Small and portable, and never runs out of batteries, he told her. And it was the last gift he ever gave her, though neither of them knew that on the morning he gave it. She had been in CIA training for 6 months when Merritt's team loaded onto the Chinook at Bagram. She had not been an ordinary student. The agency psychologist who evaluated her had worried about her age and written reports expressing concern about the long-term impacts of operational exposure on a developing adolescent. The field operatives who had actually worked with her during training had written different reports. The girl was cold under pressure, they said, in the way that meant not cold-hearted, but cold-headed, the temperature of the mind, in situations where most minds heated up and made mistakes. Methodical, patient, able to hold multiple variables simultaneously and prioritize the right one. She processed a firefight the way a chess player processes a middle game, not reacting to what was on the board, but reading what was about to be. He had died on December 23, 2023. 1 year and 1 day before this mission, he had been providing overwatch for a SEAL team in Yemen during a hostage rescue operation that had been compromised at the intelligence level before it launched. The team walked into a coordinated ambush in terrain that had been prepared for exactly the kind of operation they were running. Ray held his position for 40 minutes under fire that should have pushed him off it, providing covering fire, while the operators extracted through conditions that were nearly impossible. He did not stop firing until the last man was clear of the kill zone. He saved 11 people. The 12th shot, the one that found him, came from a position he hadn't been able to cover alone. He was 52 years old. He was Maya's father. And she had volunteered for this specific mission out of all the missions she could have been given the moment she saw 3 words in the operational brief: Christmas Day extraction. She wasn't going to let another team lose someone on Christmas. Not if she was trained and capable and present and could prevent it. That was the entirety of the calculation, and it had taken her approximately no time to make it. She understood the risk clearly. She went anyway. Because her father had always gone anyway, and he had taught her that you went anyway, not because the fear wasn't real, but because the purpose was larger than the fear. Merritt learned all of that afterward. In the aircraft flying north through the storm, he knew none of it. He knew only that she looked too young to be there, that the laughter from Briggs had been left unanswered, and that the single surviving line of redacted data on his tablet suggested his instincts about her might be not just incomplete, but genuinely wrong. He chose his instincts. He had been making that choice about people for 31 years and had been right often enough that the habit had become confident. He would think afterward that this was perhaps the most dangerous thing that long experience can do to a person. Make the wrong calls feel like the right calls, because the right calls have felt the same way for so long. They crossed the final ridgeline at 23:41 hours, and the world below the aircraft became a white that had no boundary mountains, and sky blurred together into a single colorless space that the Chinook moved through like the only real thing. The loadmaster held up two fingers. The team stood and moved into insertion order, with the choreography of men who have rehearsed this until the body knows what to do, and the mind is already somewhere else. Merritt positioned himself at the head of the ramp. A hand touched his arm, not grabbing, touching to get attention without startling. He turned. Maya stood behind him, the rifle slung across her back in a custom harnesses that distributed the weight across both shoulders, looking up at him with the expression he had been watching all flight. Not nervous, not asking for reassurance. The expression of someone who has accepted what is coming and wants to ensure the operational parameters are clearly understood before they step off the ramp. She said, "Sir, I need elevated ground and a clear northeast angle on the compound. There's a tree line west of the insertion point that may give me the position I need. I'd like authorization to establish overwatch there rather than maintaining formation." He considered that for 1 second. He said, "Stay behind the team. Don't engage without explicit authorization." She held his eyes for a moment. Something in them, not defiance, not challenge, just a quality of settled certainty that he had no category for at the time. "Yes, sir." He turned back to the ramp. The ramp dropped. The blizzard came through the opening like something that had been waiting on the other side of the door. The abandoned Soviet-era base had been under 3 feet of powder for years. They came down into it quietly, boots finding the hidden ground beneath the white, and the Chinook pulled away above them, and the world became sudden silence and cold, and the soft sound of 9 men moving through snow that absorbed every footstep. -18 Celsius on the temperature gauge, with wind chill closer to -30. The kind of cold that is not merely uncomfortable but actively hostile, that wants to slow you down and make you stop and is patient about it. Merritt oriented on the tactical display and hand-signaled the formation northeast. The compound was 200 meters ahead, pressed against the cliff face. 3-story concrete structure, partially collapsed, connected to a maze of outbuildings by roof passages, according to the satellite imagery. The whole thing had the look of something that had been built for one purpose and repurposed several times, since accumulating additions and modifications that made it harder to read from outside. 15 to 20 hostiles. That was what the packet said. The thermal display told a different story within 60 seconds of movement. Lieutenant Devereaux pulled up beside him. His voice was very quiet and very controlled, which Merritt had learned over 2 years of working together, meant that what he was about to say was something he had verified and wished he hadn't. "Sir, I'm counting signatures." "How many?" A pause. "More than the packet said, at least 40, possibly more in the main structure with the thermal bleed from the walls." Merritt kept moving. 40 against 9 in a blizzard at night was a different mission than 15 against 9. The calculus changed. Air support was still 40 minutes minimum, and 40 minutes was longer than Winslow had. But manageable. He had run harder numbers. He was 3 paces ahead of the team when Maya's voice came through the radio, quiet and precise and completely unhurried. "Sir, I've been tracking the movement patterns on thermal for the last 4 minutes. The heat signatures aren't distributing the way militia holding a position would distribute. They're moving on a grid, fire and maneuver spacing, interval discipline. Copy Sierra 7. Someone trained these men on modern combined arms tactics. This wasn't assembled in a week. The people in those positions have rehearsed their sectors." He didn't respond to that. He should have. The team reached the first structure, a collapsed garage rusted vehicle chassis half buried in snow around it, the roof long since caved in. Devereaux and Briggs moved to clear it. Empty. But the count on thermal had climbed to 45, and the pattern Maya had described was becoming harder to look at and not see. 180 meters to the compound wall. 120. At 80 meters, Merritt stopped the formation. He had been in enough kill zones in 31 years to recognize the quality of silence around them. There is silence that is empty, the silence of a place where nothing is happening and nothing is waiting to happen. And there is silence that is full. The silence of a place where people are in fixed positions and have been there long enough for their breathing to slow down and their muscles to settle into the weight. This silence was full. He was still processing that when Maya's voice came through again, and this time there was nothing quiet about the urgency beneath the level tone. RPG Gunner, Northern Ridgeline, 800 meters, 10 degrees right of the main structure. He's prone behind a low stone wall, and he is about to shoulder the weapon. Taggart, I don't see anything. Maya, he's there. Briggs not bothering to keep his voice low. She's seeing things. Visibility is maybe 20 meters in this. Merritt looked northeast through his scope. Snow, darkness. Nothing visible beyond the middle distance, the storm eating everything past 30 feet. He had 4 seconds. He had 9 operators in a compromised position and a hostage who didn't have 40 minutes and a 15-year-old girl saying she could see something he couldn't see. All elements, find hard cover. Now! The team moved. 3 seconds later, the world turned white and loud. The RPG round hit the vehicle chassis they had been using as a reference point for the formation, and the explosion was massive. The shockwave, something you felt in your chest before you heard it in your ears, the shrapnel moving through the air in the fraction of a second before your body had finished processing that the sound was real. Briggs went to one knee. His hand went to his side. He was already calling his status before the echo had finished rolling off the cliff face above them. Contact north, I'm up, flesh wound. A second RPG followed 8 seconds later, then a third angled to catch anyone who had moved from the first impact zone. The team was pinned against a low stone wall that was not high enough for comfort and not low enough to be gone from. Unable to advance without crossing open ground under fire from the high ground. Unable to retreat without the same exposure in the opposite direction. Devereaux was calling target positions. Taggart and 2 others opened up with suppressing fire toward the ridgeline, but the range was too great and the storm swallowed the rounds before they arrived. Merritt pressed himself against the wall and ran the options with the cold arithmetic that 31 years of this had made automatic. Air support 40 minutes minimum, the storm making it longer. Push forward into the prepared positions possible but ugly. Pull back possible, but Winslow didn't survive a pullback. None of the options were good. The best of the bad options required taking out the RPG positions on the ridgeline, and taking out the RPG positions required a shooter who could reach 800 meters in a blizzard. He keyed the radio. Sierra 7, what's your position? A pause of 4 seconds. 30 meters west of the formation, sir. I have a clear line on the ridgeline from a depression between 2 pine trees. I can see all 3 RPG positions. He hadn't seen her move. He hadn't heard her in the 40 seconds of chaos following the first explosion, while every other person on the team was reacting to the contact. Maya Calloway had made a decision, low-crawled through the snow away from the formation and found herself a firing position. I did not authorize, sir. Her voice was completely steady, not performing calm, actually calm. I have visual on 3 RPG positions. The second gunner is preparing to reload. Request permission to engage. Another round hit the wall 20 meters to his right. The stone shuddered under his hands. Merritt thought about the number 97.3. He said, engage. The first shot came 9 seconds later. Even through the wind and the ringing from the explosions, Merritt heard it, the suppressed crack of the TAC-338, sharp and flat and brief, swallowed almost immediately by the storm. It was a sound with a specific character different from the automatic fire that had been filling the air. The sound of a single deliberate choice. Through the tactical display, the first heat signature on the ridgeline went still. Devereaux's voice very quiet. 1 down. 6 seconds. Another back. 2 down. 11 seconds. A longer pause this time. Merritt knew what the pause meant. The third gunner had heard the first 2 shots and had moved, and she was finding him, and she was not going to fire until she had him. Then the third shot. 3 down. Radio silence for 3 full seconds. Briggs said, that's 800 meters in this. Nobody answered him. Taggart said, someone confirmed Sierra 7, just... Merritt keyed the radio. He kept his voice level with the deliberate effort of a man maintaining control of something that wants to go somewhere else. Sierra 7, confirmed 3 targets, north ridgeline. Her voice came back level and unhurried. The tone of a pilot reading off altitude. Entirely ordinary. Confirmed, sir. All 3 RPG positions neutralized. Your approach is clear. He stood with his back against the stone wall in a blizzard in Afghanistan, and he thought about a line of redacted text on a tablet screen, and he thought about a girl adjusting a scope with steady hands, while men around her laughed, and he felt something move in his chest that he spent weeks afterward finding the right word for. It was not admiration exactly, not yet. It was the specific uncomfortable feeling of a man who has just discovered the precise shape of his own blind spot. The moment when what you assumed becomes what you were wrong about, and the two things are suddenly the same thing and you cannot unmeet them. He said, "Outstanding shooting, hold position, and provide overwatch. We're advancing." He stepped out from behind the wall. The mission changed. And somewhere on the northwest ridgeline, in a position none of them had located yet, a second sniper settled in behind a heavy rifle and began to choose his target. Merritt didn't know that yet. He knew it before the night was over. The compound wall was old concrete reinforced with rusted rebar, 30 years of hard weather worked into every crack and surface. Merritt pressed his back against it and listened. Nothing from the other side, no voices, no movement, no boots on gravel. No sounds of a position being adjusted or a weapon being checked. That kind of silence was not reassuring. Silence at the gate of a compound with 45 heat signatures inside meant people in fixed positions who had been waiting long enough for patience to become disciplined. It meant prepared. It meant the team was about to enter a space that had been arranged with their entry in mind. Devereaux was at the gate with the breaching charge working fast and precise, his hands operating with the certainty of someone who has done this specific task so many times that thought is no longer the mechanism. Briggs was behind him, one hand pressed to his side where the shrapnel had opened him, the other holding his rifle with the grip of a man who has looked at the wound and decided it is not going to be relevant tonight. Taggart and the rest of the team were spread along the wall in a staggered line, weapons up covering sectors in the silence. Merritt keyed his radio softly. Sierra 7, thermal on the compound interior. Full picture. 4 seconds. Main structure, ground floor. 6 signatures clustered in the northeast corner. That's almost certainly where they have Winslow. It's the most defensible interior space based on the layout. Second floor, 9 signatures distributed across 3 rooms covering the eastern and western approaches. Outbuildings east and west, 14 more. None of them are moving. They have been in their positions for a significant amount of time. Devereaux looked at Merritt. 45 fighters in fixed positions waiting. Not a guarding force? A reception? Merritt made the calculation he always made before a breach, what he knew, what he didn't know, what he could control, what he couldn't. The list of things he couldn't control was longer than usual tonight. The storm, the terrain, the count that kept climbing. And the feeling that had settled low and certain in his chest since the RPG round hit the vehicle chassis, that someone on the other side of this wall had known they were coming, had been told, and had prepared accordingly. He filed that and moved forward. There was time to understand it later. Right now, there was only the breach and what came after. He gave the signal. Devereaux triggered the charge. The gate blew inward, and the team went through. The first shots came from the second floor before the echo of the breach had finished rolling across the courtyard. They were not panic shots. That was the first thing Merritt registered as he went left along the wall, and the team split by practiced reflex. Not the spray of men startled into action. Measured, aimed fire coming from prepared positions at windows that had been cleared of glass and debris and angled specifically for the sight lines the courtyard provided. Someone had thought about where a breaching team would move and had placed shooters accordingly. This had been rehearsed. Contact left, Briggs East outbuilding. Contact right, second floor, 2 windows. Taggart. RPG teams setting up northwest corner of the main structure. Devereaux. Merritt was behind a concrete pillar, part of what had been a covered walkway, before the roof came down, returning fire toward the nearest muzzle flash and assessing simultaneously. The courtyard was 40 meters across. 3 walls of fire and 1 wall at their backs. The outbuildings on either side connected to the main structure by covered passages that would allow fighters to reposition without crossing open ground. They had entered a box, a deliberate, prepared patient box. His radio crackled. "Commander?" Maya's voice, the quality of urgency under a level surface that he had already learned to read in the past 20 minutes. Machine gun position on the roof, southeast corner. They're setting up a PKM to cover the entire courtyard. If they get it operational in the next 60 seconds, the team loses freedom of movement entirely. He couldn't see the roof from his position. He looked at Devereaux, who shook his head no angle from his cover either. "I can take it," Maya said. "1 second. Take it." The crack of the T, H338, reached him a moment later, flat and clean through the noise of the firefight. Through the tactical display, the signature on the roof went still before the PKM came online. Machine gun position down. Briggs from the east outbuilding in a tone that was different from any tone he had used on this flight. Was that Sierra 7? Focus on your sector, Merritt said. The firefight found its rhythm, the compressed and grinding rhythm that sustained close quarters combat always settled into. Move, cover, return fire, assess. The team worked with the efficiency of people who have trained for exactly this, moving through a kill box, degrading the threat, maintaining cohesion under fire from multiple directions. But the numbers were wrong. 45 against 9 in prepared positions inside a compound built to channel and trap was not a problem that good tactics alone could solve quickly enough. Every time the team tried to advance toward the main structure, fire from a new direction pushed them back into cover. Every time they found a moment of relative suppression on one axis, another axis became active. It was Maya who was keeping them alive. She was doing it with the methodical patience of someone who had been taught to think about a battlefield as a problem to be solved rather than a situation to be survived. Not the biggest threat, the most important threat. Not the nearest target, the one that, if left unaddressed, would end the team's ability to function. A flanking fighter working his way through the eastern passage. A window on the second floor where a shooter was setting up an angle on Devereaux's position. A doorway where two men were preparing a rush on the team's left. Each time one shot. Each time the specific problem stopped existing. Merritt started to understand, watching the tactical display and listening to the radio, and feeling the shape of the engagement change in ways that shouldn't have been possible with 9 effective operators against 45 prepared fighters, that the number 97.3 was not a statistic about controlled conditions. It was a statement about this, about blizzards and kill boxes and the quality of judgment that decides which shot to take and when to hold. Then Devereaux's voice came through with a quality Merritt recognized from years of working together as the specific register of a man delivering information he has verified and wishes were different. Sniper, northeast tower. He just dropped Martinez. The minaret rose 15 meters above the main structure. The south face had partially collapsed, which left the north face intact, clean sight lines across most of the compound's sheltered position, good control over the rooftop exit routes the team would need for extraction. From up there in the dark, with the patience to select targets rather than spray a skilled shooter could systematically remove the team's ability to move. Martinez was down in the east outbuilding. Round through the upper thigh, Taggart reported. Alive, stable, but down. 8 effective operators now against a compound that had been arranged for more. Sierra 7, northeast minaret. Can you get eyes on the shooter? A pause that was longer than her previous ones. She was working the angle problem in real time. I have a partial profile when he moves to fire. He is not Taliban militia. His shot discipline is too good. His position selection is too deliberate. He's had significant formal training. He takes his time and he selects. He hasn't wasted a round. Can you neutralize him? He has cover on 3 sides from the minaret structure. I need him to shift position before I have a viable shot. If he moves to re-engage the east outbuilding, I'll have a window. It will be brief, 30 seconds to get into position once he commits to the move. Briggs, suppressing the western passage, called across the courtyard. We don't have 30 seconds. Mom Merritt, you have 30 seconds, Sierra 7. Clock starts when you call it. Silence for 8 seconds. Then, he's moving. Clock. Merritt counted. The shot came at 22. The signature in the minaret went still and stayed still. Radio silence, longer than the pauses after the ridgeline, long enough that it became a kind of statement in itself. Then Briggs said something under his breath that Merritt didn't fully catch over the firefight noise, but the register was unmistakable. It was the register of a man who has held a confident opinion and has just watched it become untenable. Taggart. That tower, 600 meters at minimum through a partially collapsed structure. Devereaux keeping the team on task. Everyone focus. We still have a compound to clear. But even Devereaux's voice was different than it had been an hour earlier. Something in it had shifted. With the rooftop PKM down and the tower sniper gone, the Taliban fighters in the compound had lost the elevated fire control that had made the kill box so effective. They were still dangerous, still numerous, still fighting with the discipline of men who had been well organized before the breach. But the compound was no longer working against the team the way it had been designed to. The architectural advantage was being dismantled, one shot at a time, from a position in the tree line that the fighters inside the compound couldn't locate or address. Merritt pushed the team toward the main structure. They found Winslow on the ground floor northeast corner, exactly where Maya had placed him on the thermal display. He was beaten, dehydrated. One eye swollen shut, a wrist that had been broken and left untreated. He was conscious. He could move. Devereaux and Briggs got in between them. We need extraction. Sierra 7 clear for exfil to the east landing zone. The pause before her answer was different from the tactical pauses. Longer. The pause of someone who has seen something and is deciding how to present it. No, sir. Northwest ridgeline, 1,100 meters. There is a second sniper setting up a firing position. He has been working into it for the past 6 minutes while I was engaged with the compound. He is close to established. Merritt went still. He processed that number. 1,100 meters was outside the reliable engagement envelope for most precision shooters under field conditions. Under ideal conditions in daylight with calm air and a stable platform, a skilled shooter could work at that range with acceptable accuracy. In a blizzard at night, shooting uphill against a target who was building a position deliberately and knew exactly what he was doing. 1,100 meters was a different problem entirely. Theoretically possible, practically a conversation about margins that grew very thin, very fast. He also processed the second sniper's presence on its own terms. Not as a tactical complication, but as information about what this operation actually was. 2 professional snipers with formal training on the same night operation. 45 fighters with grid discipline, fire and maneuver tactics. A compound designed as a kill zone rather than a holding facility. This was not a Taliban militia op. Someone had assembled this. Someone had studied how SEAL extraction teams operated, had understood that the most efficient way to neutralize one was elevation and prepared fire positions, and had resourced the solution. He filed that understanding and returned to the immediate problem. Can you engage him? Her pause was the longest of the night, not because she was hesitating, because she was being honest about something she could have overstated. Range is at the edge of my reliable envelope in these conditions. The wind is inconsistent, gusting in patterns I haven't fully modeled yet. I can force him to reposition, which may create a shot opportunity. If I get a window with the right conditions, 70% confidence. Merritt absorbed that. 70% at 1,100 meters in a blizzard was by any technical measure a statement of extraordinary capability. It was also a 30% chance of a miss. At that range, a miss was not close. A miss was a significant distance in a direction that the wind determined. What does he do to the team if you don't engage him? He takes a shot in the next 2 to 3 minutes. He has the extraction route covered from his current position. The arithmetic was simple and unpleasant. Work the problem, Sierra 7. Yes, sir. What happened next took 11 minutes. Merritt watched the clock on his tactical display for part of it and watched the Northwest Ridge line for the rest, trying to see what Maya was seeing and unable to because what she was seeing was invisible to him and would remain invisible even after she explained it. She forced the Northwest sniper to reposition twice in the first 4 minutes. Not trying to hit that was what she told him afterward in the aircraft on the way back, matter-of-factly. Bracketing, putting rounds close enough that a professional shooter would recognize the counter-sniper threat and calculate that staying in position was more expensive than moving. Each time the signature shifted, she lost her angle and waited, tracking the movement, pattern, building a model of how he thought and how he moved and where his instincts would take him when he felt pressure again. She was reading him. It was the thing her father had spent years trying to teach, and that most shooters never fully internalize, that a sniper engagement is not a targeting problem. It is a human problem. The other person is not a static target to be solved through ballistics. They are a mind-making decisions, and those decisions have patterns. And if you are patient enough and still enough and quiet enough inside your own head, you can learn to read the patterns before they execute. Ray Calloway had been able to do this at a level that the instructors who worked alongside him described as almost unsettling. He could watch a target through a scope for 30 minutes and know with a reliability that defied the intuition's claim to randomness which way the person was about to move and when. He had tried to teach it by articulation. Here is the micro-shift in the shoulder that precedes movement. Left here is what the head does before the body follows, and his students had gotten better. But articulation was never quite the mechanism. The mechanism was something that lived below language. Maya had it. She had had it since before she could fully articulate what it was, and her father had recognized it in her, the way you recognize something in your children, that you also carry the specific delight of seeing a capacity you thought was particular to you reflected back with its own clarity. She was using it now on Victor Soren, reading his movement patterns through the scope at 1,100 meters in a blizzard, building a model of a professional she had never met, constructing from evidence. Alone the decision tree that would tell her when his patience would commit him to a position and give her the window she needed. At minute 7, the Northwest sniper stopped moving. He had found a new position, better angle on the extraction route, and he was settling in for a shot. The deliberate patience of someone who has done this before and knows that the shot taken from the right position at the right moment is worth the time it costs to get there. Merritt heard Maya's breathing change on the radio. It slowed. Not the slowness of hesitation, the slowness of someone who has stopped preparing and started doing, who has found the place past all the variables where the decision is simple. He said nothing. He waited. The shot came at minute 9. 4 seconds of silence that were each very long. Then her voice. Target down, northwest ridgeline. Confirmed, Devereaux, 1,100 meters. Taggart quietly, in a blizzard. Briggs said nothing for a moment. He was looking across the courtyard in the direction of the tree line. Then more quietly than anything he had said all night, with a different quality than anything that had come before it. Her father trained her. Merritt heard that. He did not respond to it. He gave the order to move to the extraction point. He kept moving. He felt the weight of what Briggs had said the whole way to the clearing. The extraction point was 200 meters east, a clearing large enough for a Chinook in acceptable conditions. The storm had not improved. The wind was gusting hard across the open ground, pushing 40 kilometers per hour in the exposed space between the tree line and the clearing. The temperature had dropped further. They were halfway to the clearing when Maya came back on the radio. Sir, valley to the south. 30 to 40 heat signatures moving uphill in organized formation. Current pace puts them at approximately 15 minutes out. Devereaux looked at Merritt. Reinforcements. Someone had called for them from inside the compound before the breach, or the operation had been designed with a second wave. Expedite extraction, Merritt said. They moved faster. At 100 meters from the clearing, the warlord came out of the compound. His name was Rahimi. Merritt knew it from the intelligence packet, a mid-level Taliban commander who had expanded his area of operations significantly in the past 18 months. The kind of capture that would generate intelligence value outlasting the mission itself. He came out of a concealed bunker entrance at the compound's eastern edge with 2 bodyguards flanking him and a child in front of him. A girl, 10 years old at most, coat too large for her sleeves hanging past her hands. He had his right hand on her shoulder and was moving toward the tree line at the far end of the open ground, using her as both shield and leverage, the 2 bodyguards laying down, suppressing fire to keep the team behind cover. Devereaux, I cannot get a shot. He is completely centered behind her. Briggs, same. He's keeping her exactly between himself and any angle we have. Merritt watched through his scope. Rahimi was moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had either done this before or trained for it carefully. Not panicking, not rushing, moving toward a ravine 40 meters ahead that would give him cover that no thermal imaging would penetrate in this storm. If he reached it, finding one man with a child in that terrain in this weather was the work of hours that no one had. Sierra 7, Merritt kept his voice flat and precise. Do you have an angle? The pause before her answer was the longest of the night. Long enough that he counted the seconds. I have a possible shot, but I need you to understand what I'm looking at before I tell you what I can do, sir. Talk to me. His right hand. Look at the position on her shoulder if you can get an angle on it. It is not a drag grip. It is not the hold of someone pulling a person along. It is a pain compliance hold. A specific control technique that works through applied pressure on the nerve cluster where the shoulder meets the neck. The kind of hold that you use when you expect the person to resist and want to be able to enforce compliance through pain. He looked. The angle was bad from his position. He took it on faith. He's expecting her to try to run, he said. Yes, sir. Which means when the grip releases, if it releases suddenly through involuntary muscle failure, her instinct will be to move away from the source of pain, away from him, as fast and as far as her body will take her. A pause. He could hear her breathing through the radio, slow and controlled. I can shoot the wrist. His right wrist. Not the man, not the girl, the wrist. At that range on that target, if the shot is accurate, the bone fractures. The nervous system cannot maintain muscle tension through that kind of trauma. It is an involuntary response. The grip will fail regardless of his intention to hold it. Merritt watched Rahimi crossing the open ground. The ravine was 30 meters away. 25. Confidence level on the shot. The longest pause of the night. 60%. 60%. Meaning 4 times in 10 the conditions or the calculation or the wind shifted at the wrong moment and the shot went somewhere else. And somewhere else at 890 meters through moving pine branches in a blizzard was not close. Hold your fire, he said. We pursue on foot. He was already moving when her voice came back. Not asking, stating, calmly with the same register she had used to report 3 confirmed kills at 800 meters. "Commander, I'm shooting his wrist, not the girl." He stopped. He would spend time afterward thinking about what the correct command decision was. Whether there was an argument, procedural, tactical, legal, that made the order he had given the right call, and whether holding to it would have been justified. Whether the 30-yard distance to the ravine mattered more or less than the 40%. He would think about all of that. In the moment, he said nothing. Because in the moment, he was looking at a 15-year-old girl who had been right about everything else that had happened tonight, and the most honest response he was capable of was the one that acknowledged that. His silence was the answer. She took the shot. The sound of it was different from the others. He could not have explained exactly why. Same rifle, same suppressor, same flat crack against the wind. But something in the moment around the sound made it distinct in memory from everything before it. The way certain sounds carry the weight of what they mean rather than just what they are. Rahimi's right arm went out. His wrist was wrong immediately. Visibly, obviously wrong. The wrongness of something that has stopped operating the way it was built to and will never operate that way again. He went to his knees in the snow. The girl dropped. Not fell, dropped. Instantly, completely, her body rolling away from Rahimi in one single fluid motion, as if it had been waiting precisely for this moment, as if the grip releasing was the signal her body had been ready to answer for the entire crossing. She was 4 feet from him and moving before he had finished processing what had happened to his arm. The bodyguards turned toward the threat. They were still turning when 2 more shots came 4 seconds apart, each placed with the same clean precision as every shot before them. Both bodyguards went down. Devereaux reached Rahimi in 12 seconds and had him secured with zip ties, his one functional hand and the ruin of the other before the man had finished screaming. Briggs went to the girl. He reached her in 6 strides, scooped her up without breaking momentum, and took off his outer jacket, his actual jacket, not a spare layer in -30 wind chill that he was going to feel for the rest of the night, and wrapped it around her. She grabbed the lapels with both hands and held on. Merritt keyed his radio. He had intended to say something professional, something that belonged in an after-action report that documented the engagement and confirmed the outcome and moved the situation forward. He heard himself say, "Sierra 7, that was either the best shot I've ever seen or the luckiest. I genuinely don't know which." A pause. "Neither, sir. It was the necessary shot." He stood in the snow in the dark, in a blizzard on a mountain in Afghanistan, holding a rifle with a hand that was not quite steady for the first time tonight, and he thought about a girl at the back of a Chinook adjusting a scope with steady hands, while men around her laughed. The Chinook was audible, coming in from the east. Then from inside the main structure, in the darkness near the eastern wall, something moved. A figure, moving slowly, favoring one side heavily. One shoulder lower than the other, the way a shoulder goes when something in it has stopped working correctly. The Northwest Ridge sniper, not dead, wounded, moving carefully, carrying something under his uninjured arm that was flat and rectangular and was not a weapon. He stepped into the light from a burning outbuilding one of the eastern structures had caught from a tracer round during the breach, and Merritt saw him clearly for the first time. Mid-50s, heavy frame gone lean from years of operational use. The face of someone who had spent a long time in difficult places and had stopped being surprised by any of them. A face that had made decisions and was still carrying them. He set what he was carrying on the ground in front of him. He raised both hands, palms open, fingers spread. He looked past Merritt, past Devereaux, past all of them. He looked toward the tree line where Maya was. He said in accented English that had spent real time in American training and environments, "I need to speak with Ray Calloway's daughter." Merritt raised his weapon. The man did not lower his hands, did not move, did not look away from the tree line. Just stood in the light from the burning building with his palms open and his shoulder bleeding through his jacket, in the patience of someone who has been trying to reach this exact moment for a very long time and has finally arrived and is prepared to wait for it to unfold. From the tree line to the west, Maya's voice came across the radio one final time before the night was over. "I'm coming in." She did not ask permission. She had stopped asking permission some time ago. She came out of the tree line the same way she had done everything else that night, without announcement, without performance. The TAC Seja 3-8 slung across her back in the custom harness. The bipod folded the action clear. Her jacket soaked through at the elbows and knees from 90 minutes of prone position in a blizzard. Ice in her braid. Her face carrying the specific redness that comes from lying still in extreme cold for a long time. A colder thing in its way than moving through it because moving generates heat and stillness does not. She walked across the courtyard like she had every right to be in it. Merritt held his weapon on Victor Soren. Devereaux was to Soren's left at an angle. Briggs stood near the compound wall with Layla still wrapped in his jacket. One large hand on her back, the girl watching everything around her, with the particular wide attention of a child who has learned that careful observation is a survival skill. Soren's hand stayed up. His eyes tracked Maya across the courtyard with an expression that Merritt read slowly and carefully, the way you read something you know matters before you understand why. Not the expression of someone measuring options. Not the calculation of a man deciding whether to run or fight or negotiate. The expression of someone who has been trying to reach a specific destination for a very long time and has arrived. Maya stopped 6 feet from him. She looked at him without speaking. Not studying him for threat, she had already made that assessment crossing the courtyard, looking at him the way you look at something you need to understand before you respond to it. Then, you knew who I was before tonight. Not a question. Soren said yes. You had shots at me, twice on the ridgeline, maybe more. Yes. You didn't take them. No. Why? He lowered his hands with deliberate slowness, watching Merritt as he did it, making each movement readable and predictable. He reached down and picked up what he had placed on the ground in front of him. A document-case military-grade waterproof canvas, the kind built for materials that need to survive, field conditions, exposure handling, that would destroy ordinary packaging. He held it toward Maya. Because your father saved my life in 2019, he said, and because I owed him a debt that I was never able to repay before he died, and because everything that is in this case is the reason you are standing on this mountain tonight, and the reason he is not. The courtyard was quiet except for the wind and the sound of the Chinook growing louder from the east. Maya did not take the case immediately. She looked at Soren with the expression Merritt had first seen in the aircraft and had spent the whole night learning to read. The expression of someone who has been carrying a specific question for a long time, carrying it every day, in every room, through every conversation, and is standing at the moment where the answer either arrives or doesn't. She took the case. Merritt made a decision in that moment that he would describe later in debrief rooms and in one conversation with his son years afterward as the best command decision he made all night. Better than the decision to engage the RPG positions. Better than the order to pursue on foot. Better than anything tactical. He did not interrupt. He kept his weapon ready. He tracked the extraction timeline in the back of his mind with the part of his brain that never stopped running the math Chinook 3 minutes out, reinforcements from the valley, perhaps 12 minutes behind it. The window existed. It was narrow. It required movement before those two numbers converged. But he did not interrupt. Because what was happening in front of him belonged to Maya Calloway in a way that nothing else he had witnessed tonight had, and the least he could do after the things he had failed to do from the moment she walked up the ramp was give her the space to receive it without his voice in the way. She opened the case. Dense documentation. Intelligence reports in the format he recognized from joint briefings. Photographs, communication logs with timestamps and routing headers. 3 pages from an internal agency system whose format he had seen enough times to know exactly what level of authorization was required to generate outputs from it. He watched her face as she read. Complete stillness. The stillness of someone absorbing something that reorganizes everything they thought they knew. The stillness, not of emptiness, but of a mind working very fast on something very important and devoting all available resources to it. 2 minutes. She closed the case. She held it against her chest with both arms the way you hold something you don't want to put down. Tell me, she said to Soren, your words, everything. Soren spoke with the careful precision of someone who has rehearsed this in his head many times and wants to get it right. Your father's position in Yemen was compromised 4 hours before the mission launched, not through a field security failure, not through a breach in the team's communications equipment or protocols. Through a deliberate communication from inside your agency, a transmission from a source with significant internal access routed to a contact who passed the information directly to the faction your father was monitoring. Someone provided his exact coordinates, his exact timing, and the parameters of his Overwatch position. Maya said nothing. I was contracted for the Overwatch elimination, a separate contract from the faction engagement. Your father's death was meant to appear as a casualty of the firefight, not as a targeted killing. Someone wanted the sequence to look like combat loss. He paused. I accepted the contract because the access it provided was the only way I could investigate from the inside. I needed to understand who had arranged it and why. Before I confirmed, I ran the background on the target, as I always do. I found out who Ray Calloway was. What he had done in 2019 in a situation I was involved in, for men he had no reason to protect at personal cost to his own position. He did it because it was the right thing to do. No other reason. A pause long enough to hear the Chinook's rotors more clearly. I refused the contract. I removed myself from the network and burned the contact who had hired me. But I was one man with information that no credible channel inside your agency had any reason to receive or act on. Because the person who had arranged it was still inside the agency, still managing which information moved and which information was stopped before it reached anyone with the authority to act on it. Merritt felt something happen in his chest. He held his face completely still. Who? Maya said. Your handler, Soren said. The person who recruited you 6 months after your father's death, who gave you the training and the tasking and the access, who assigned you to this mission tonight. Director Caldwell. The wind moved through the courtyard. Merritt looked at Devereaux. Devereaux looked at Merritt. Neither of them spoke. Maya stood with the document case against her chest and the snow coming down around her, and she held still long enough that Merritt found himself watching her the way you watch something structural and hope it holds under the weight being placed on it. It held. She said, "Why did she recruit me?" Soren's expression changed. The particular change of a man delivering the part of the truth he knows will cost the most. You are Ray Calloway's daughter. You have his skills and his institutional credibility, and over time, you would have had his access. In 16 months, perhaps 18, you would have been in a position to start asking questions that he would have asked with the kind of inside knowledge that civilians never have and outsiders can't obtain. She needed you inside a classified program where your activities were monitored and your reach was controlled. And she needed you in the field in situations where the outcome is genuinely uncertain, where a 15-year-old asset lost in a classified operation in Afghanistan generates no formal inquiry and leaves no trail that anyone with authority will pursue. The Chinook was 2 minutes out. Merritt keyed his radio with his left-hand weapon, steady in his right. Devereaux, everything from the past 5 minutes time-stamped encrypted backup address. Confirm status. Already running, sir. Confirmed transmitted 90 seconds ago. Maya looked at Merritt. He said, it's already out of her reach. By the time we land, it will be in the hands of people she cannot get to. She held his eyes for a moment. Something passed through them. Not relief exactly, more like the specific adjustment of someone who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and has just confirmed that another person is carrying part of it now. She looked back at Soren. You came here contracted to kill me, she said, and you delivered this instead. The contract was the only path inside this operation. I have been trying to reach you for 14 months through every accessible channel. Tonight was the first time the path was open. You wounded Devereaux. At a range where center mass was available to me, I needed to remain credible to the people who hired me long enough to complete the delivery. I used the minimum that would achieve that, nothing more. Devereaux said from the flank in a tone that carried more complexity than the words he's saying he chose to lose. I made a choice about what mattered more, Soren said. I can stand behind that choice. Merritt made the final command decision of the night. He comes with us, witness, not prisoner, separated from Rahimi, not restrained, available for debrief at my discretion. He made sure every member of the team heard the next words clearly. That is the order, and it is not open for discussion. No one argued. The Chinook came down through the blizzard on its second approach, fighting the gusts all the way to the ground with the controlled aggression of a crew that knows exactly what the aircraft can do and is asking it to do all of it. It found the clearing and touched down with the careful urgency of a pilot who has been given a time window and intends to use none more than necessary. They loaded in the order that mattered. Martinez first on the stretcher, already arguing about the stretcher and being ignored by everyone around him in a way that told you he was going to be fine. Briggs carried Layla up the ramp without putting her down. She held onto his jacket with both hands. When he set her in a seat, she looked around the cargo bay and then through the noise and the cold and the smell of hydraulic fluid and the particular disorientation of a child who has been through too much tonight, she found Maya coming up the ramp. For a moment, everything else fell away. The urgency, the extraction timeline, the burned buildings visible through the windows behind them. It was a 10-year-old girl and a 15-year-old girl looking at each other across a cargo bay. Across everything that had happened in the dark outside. Layla smiled, the specific smile of a child who has been through something terrible and has found on the other side of it something that makes the world feel less irreparably broken than it did an hour ago. The smile of someone who has been reminded against the evidence of the last few hours that the world contains people who will come for you. Maya smiled back. 3 seconds. Then the ramp closed and the Chinook lifted and the mountain fell away into the white below them, already being covered by the storm, already becoming the past. Nobody slept on the flight back. The team sat in the silence that follows sustained intensity. Not trauma, not for operators at this level, not from a single engagement, but the particular internal accounting that arrives when the action stops. The mind running inventory. What happened against what was expected? Where the gaps were? What the gaps meant? Briggs sat very still so as not to disturb Lalo, who had fallen asleep against his arm, with the complete uncalculating trust of a child who has made a decision about safety and committed to it. He held his arm at an angle that was slightly uncomfortable and did not adjust it for the entire flight. It was, as Merritt observed without saying anything, possibly the most careful Briggs had been about anything in 6 years of service. Winslow sat across the bay watching everything with the eyes of a man who was beginning to understand the scope of what he had been inside without knowing it and what had been done to get him out. At one point, he looked at Maya for a long time and said to no one in particular, "How old is she?" Briggs, without looking up, 15. Winslow looked at his hands after that. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the flight. Soren was in the forward section, separated from the team. His shoulder wound dressed roughly and effectively by the medic, who had also looked at the wound and told him it would need proper work at Bagram. He sat with the specific stillness of a man who has completed the thing he set out to do and is experiencing, perhaps for the first time in 14 months, the strange weightlessness of a burden discharged. He wasn't monitoring the team or running assessments. He was just sitting, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone who has paid a debt and found in paying it that it was worth more than he had calculated. Maya was at the back, same seat, the TNA AC 338 field stripped across her knees, her hands reassembling it from memory, in the unhurried way of someone for whom the process is so deeply learned, it requires nothing from the conscious mind. Her left hand held her father's mirror. She turned it slowly while her right hand worked the components, the scratched surface catching the aircraft's interior light in brief, irregular flashes. Merritt crossed the bay and sat across from her. She looked up. He said, "I was wrong about you, not just tonight, from the moment you walked up the ramp. Every assumption I formed and everything I left unsaid because of those assumptions. I was wrong and you had every right to call it out, and you didn't, and that says something about your character that I don't have a good enough word for." A pause. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment, not coldly, not with the satisfaction of an acknowledgement that was overdue, with something more complicated, the expression of someone for whom an apology can be genuine and meaningful and still not quite arrive at the heart of the thing. She said, "My father never needed anyone to tell him he was right. He needed to do the work. That was enough for him." She turned the mirror over once in her hand. "I think it's enough for me, too." Merritt nodded. She looked down at the mirror. "He gave me this the Christmas I turned 12. He said it could save your life, make them think they've spotted your position when you're already somewhere else entirely. He said the most dangerous thing in the field isn't the enemy. It's the assumption that you already know what you're looking at." Merritt let that sit in the air between them. "He was talking about more than sniper craft." "Yes," Maya said, "he was." She set the mirror carefully in her chest pocket, the same pocket it had been in all night. Merritt took out his phone and showed her the screen, the preliminary report he had drafted on the ground at Bagram before they lifted off 4 sentences that he had had Devereaux photograph and transmit as part of the encrypted record. Asset Sierra 7 provided precision, long-range fire support under extreme adverse conditions. 12 confirmed enemy KIA, multiple threats neutralized at ranges exceeding 1,100 meters in blizzard conditions. Her actions directly resulted in 0 friendly casualties and successful mission completion. This operator demonstrated skills and judgment equivalent to or exceeding the most experienced personnel on this team. Highest possible recommendation. She read it without speaking. Then she reached into her kit and took out the challenge coin Merritt had placed in her hand on the tarmac blank on the reverse face, the way all coins are before someone decides what to put there. She held it for a moment. What happens to Soren? The most significant debrief of the year. 14 months of documented work on Caldwell's network. That doesn't get filed and forgotten. He risked everything to get that case to me. I know. I'm going to make sure personally that it's handled the right way. A pause. What happens to me? Merritt considered this the way it deserved to be considered honestly without the comfort of false certainty. There will be reviews. Arguments in rooms about precedent and protocol and the legal and ethical dimensions of what the agency has been permitted to do. Those arguments are legitimate and they will take time. Months, maybe longer. He looked at her steadily. What will not change regardless of how those arguments resolve is what is in the after-action report and what is in the time-stamped recording and what every person on this aircraft knows to be true about tonight. She met his eyes. You are 15 years old, he said. That is a true statement. It is also true that tonight you held this team together when I was not seeing clearly enough to hold it myself. Both of those things are true simultaneously. The people in those review rooms will have to figure out what to do with both of them. That's their job. A pause. My job was tonight, and tonight you were the best operator on this aircraft. She was quiet for a long time. Then Briggs spoke from across the bay, not looking up from Layla sleeping against his arm, the voice of a man saying something he has been working up to for a while. 11 years in, I've served alongside good people. He looked across the bay at Maya, that wrist shot, knowing she'd dropped from the nerve reflex, calculating it, taking it at 60% in those conditions, through moving branches at that range. He shook his head once slowly. I don't know another person who would have attempted it. I definitely don't know another person who would have made it. He met her eyes. The things I said when you came up the ramp, I want you to know that I understand exactly how wrong they were. Maya looked at him. You didn't know, she said. That's not much of an excuse. It's not an excuse, it's a reason. Those aren't the same thing. Briggs held her gaze for a moment. Then he reached into his vest pocket and took out a Team 9 patch right shoulder operational and held it across the bay toward her. She took it. One by one, without coordination or any visible signal between them, the other operators came forward. A patch, a coin already worn from years in a pocket, a handshake that lasted a beat longer than formal handshakes do. Taggart said nothing at all, just extended his hand, and when she shook it, his grip communicated the thing his words would have said. Devereaux was last. He stood in front of her and said, Your father trained some of the best operators I've worked with. I knew 2 of them before tonight. He trained you better than any of them. Maya held everything they had given her in her lap and looked at it. The thing she had been holding since December 23rd of the year before the specific loneliness of a grief that no one around her was equipped to understand the weight of knowing things about what had happened that she couldn't prove and couldn't share, came down the way things come down after they have been under pressure long enough. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in stages, each stage releasing something the next one couldn't hold. The tears came hot against her cold face. She didn't apologize for them, and Merritt said quietly, Your father told you snipers don't cry. She half smiled without looking up. How did you know that? Because every one of them says exactly that, and every good one I have ever known was wrong about it. She looked up at him. He said, the ones who remember that every trigger pull matters, that every life has weight, including the lives they take, those are the ones who stay human inside this work. That is not weakness. That is the only thing that separates what you did tonight from something else entirely. Don't lose that. Whatever else changes, don't lose that. She nodded once, wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked out the small window at the darkness outside, which had the quality now of something that was about to change. The dark that comes just before something different, Christmas morning. Bagram at first light. The Chinook touched down at 0611 hours. Ground crews and medical personnel came out to meet them with the organized urgency of people who have been ready since midnight. Martinez came off the stretcher under his own power before the aircraft fully stopped moving, dismissed the medic's assessment in language that indicated he was going to be entirely fine, and shook Maya's hand as he passed. He stopped and looked at her for a moment with the direct gaze of someone saying something they mean and want to make sure lands correctly. Heard it was you on Overwatch tonight, heard most of it. Another pause. Good to still be here. Because of you. Winslow was met by 2 State Department officials who had maintained their vigil at Bagram through the night. He shook Merritt's hand and then, visibly deciding something, turned and shook Maya's with the grip of a man who understands he is shaking hands with the reason he is standing on a tarmac rather than being processed across a border. I'm told you're the reason I'm here. He looked like he was going to spend a long time processing what that meant. Thank you. She said, go home. It's Christmas. Something in his expression shifted the release of something that had been held for 6 days. He went. Briggs carried Layla to the female interpreter and medic, who were waiting with enough Dari to tell her she was safe and that the people around her intended to take care of her. She went with them carefully, the careful trust of a child recalibrating her understanding of the world. At the door she stopped and turned and looked across the tarmac, found Maya in the distance and raised one hand. Maya raised hers. Layla turned and went inside. Rahimi was processed efficiently by military intelligence officers who understood exactly what they had received and were professionally pleased about it. Soren was taken to a separate room by two people Merritt had handpicked for the assignment, people he trusted to understand that the man in the room was a witness with 14 months of documented work, not a prisoner to be processed. Before the door closed, Merritt stopped at the threshold and looked at Soren. He said, "The debt that was owed to Ray Calloway, we are going to make sure it is paid in full. You have my word on that." Soren looked at him with the expression of a man who has spent a long time not expecting words like that and has just received them anyway. He nodded once. Director Caldwell arrived at 07:14 hours. Dark coat, quick walk. The bearing of a person who is accustomed to being the most informed presence in any room she enters, who has spent years in positions where being the most informed person was the primary source of leverage. She was smiling as she crossed the tarmac toward Maya. The particular smile of someone who has been waiting for a result, has received confirmation of success, and is projecting the satisfaction of a plan that has come together. She extended her hand. "Merry Christmas, Sierra 7. I hear it went exceptionally well." Maya looked at the extended hand. She did not take it. Caldwell's smile held for a moment by force of professional habit, the reflex of someone who has maintained composure through much harder moments than this, and then registered what the geometry around her actually was. Merritt 6 feet to her left, standing completely still, not moving to greet her. The two FBI agents who had been stationed near the hangar entrance for 41 minutes, now walking across the tarmac with the quiet, unhurried purpose of people who have completed all necessary preparation and are moving to the final step. Caldwell turned. She understood immediately. The understanding was visible in the way her posture adjusted, not collapsing, not performing, surprised, not running any of the calculations that would have been instinctive in a lesser professional, simply adjusting with the composure of someone who has known this was always possible and has arrived at the moment of it. The conversation with the agents was brief, procedural, exactly what it needed to be. Before they walked her away, Caldwell looked at Maya one time. Not with anger, not with a plea, not with any of the things that a less self-aware person would have shown in that moment. With the look of someone who has run a calculation many times across many years, who has based the most significant decision of a long career on that calculation, and who has encountered at the very end in the last moment where it matters the variable they failed to correctly account for. An acknowledgement, in the only honest moment of a very long, dishonest operation. Maya held her gaze without speaking. She held it until Caldwell looked away first. Then she looked at the mountains. Merritt found her where he expected to find her. The same stretch of tarmac, the same posture, straight-backed, settled, the posture of someone who has spent long hours in a fixed position and carries it in the body even when they don't need to. The rifle case beside her, the mirror in her hand turning slowly, catching the early light of Christmas morning in small, irregular flashes. He sat down next to her. They were quiet for a while. The specific quiet of two people who have been through something together and have nothing left to prove to each other and nothing left to explain. Maya said she thought I'd be easier to manage than my father was. Yes. Because I was 15. Yes. She made the same mistake you made. Merritt looked at her steadily. She made it for different reasons than I did. Maya considered that. Yes, she said. That's true. A pause that neither of them filled. My father used to say that the field reveals everything. Whatever you actually are, the field shows it eventually. You can perform for a while, but you can't perform indefinitely, and the field has more patience than performance does. She turned the mirror over in the light. I think he meant it as a warning about honesty, about being honest with yourself before the field forces it on you from the outside. He sounds like someone I would have trusted completely. He was the most trustworthy person I ever knew. The past tense of it carried what it always carried. I'm still learning what he was trying to tell me. I think I'll be learning it for a long time. The sun was fully up now Christmas morning over the Hindu Kush, the sky clear and cold and indifferent to everything that had happened in the dark below it. The kind of morning that doesn't acknowledge the night before, that simply begins, that offers what it offers regardless of what was paid for it. Maya looked at the mountains for a long time. Then she looked down at the scratched mirror in her hand. She said in a voice quiet enough that it might have been meant only for herself, but she said it aloud and Merritt heard it and understood that he was meant to hear it. I kept them safe, Dad. Every one of them, just like you taught me. The mountains held the light and gave nothing back. Merritt stood. He reached into his pocket and took out the challenge coin, the coin she had returned to him before boarding the Chinook, asking him to have it engraved at the base facility before they landed. He had called in a favor, rushed, the kind of thing that happens when the person being asked understands immediately why it matters. He held it out. She opened her hand. The coin was warm from his pocket. She turned it over and read what was on the back. Sierra 7, Christmas 2024, 0 casualties. She held it for a long time. Then she put it in her chest pocket next to the mirror, next to the patch, next to everything from tonight that she was going to carry forward. She stood, picked up the rifle case, looked at Merritt with the expression he had been learning to read all night, which he could now read clearly. "Whatever they decide about what comes next," she said, "I'll be ready." He believed her without qualification. She walked toward the building where the rest of the team was waiting. Merritt watched her go. Spring 2026, Fort Bragg. Last morning, the boxes were packed. The certificate was off the wall and in the second box. The drawers were empty except for the coin, which was not in a drawer anymore. It was in his hand, which is where it had been most mornings for the past 16 months. He set it on the empty desk. He stood at the window and looked at the parade ground below. Trucks, voices. The ordinary machinery of a place that kept running regardless of who was in it or what they were carrying when they left. He had been part of this machinery for 31 years, and today was the last day he would be, and the machinery would continue in the morning, and he would not be part of it, and that was how it was supposed to work. He turned from the window. On the empty desk beside the coin, there was a hand mirror. Scratched, the frame slightly bent at one corner, the reflective surface worn to the degree that it showed you clearly, but softly, the way memory shows things. Maya had brought it back 3 days after Christmas, when she had come to Bagram for the initial round of debriefs, and she had asked if she could leave it somewhere safe while things were being sorted out. She had never come back for it. He had kept it on his desk for 16 months. Every morning, sitting down to begin the day's work, he had seen it. He had thought about the father who gave it and the technique he built into his daughter through years of patient teaching, and the night she had used it to deceive a professional killer at a range that should not have been manageable in a blizzard on a mountainside in Afghanistan. He had thought about what it meant that she had left it here. He understood eventually that she had left it for the same reason her father had given it to her. Not for vanity, not for sentiment, for function. So that there would be something on this desk that made whoever sat behind it see something they might otherwise miss. A reminder present every morning that the surface of a thing is not the thing itself. That what you assume you are looking at and what you are actually looking at are not always the same, and the gap between them is where the important things happen. She had decided that Merritt's office was the right place for that reminder. She had not explained that reasoning to him directly, and he had not asked. He had simply understood it the way he had come to understand most things about Maya, after sufficient evidence, with a clarity that arrived only once he had stopped defending his original position. He had decided this morning not to take it with him when he left. He would leave it for whoever came next. For whoever worked in this office on mornings when they needed to be reminded of something that 31 years had not quite managed to teach him, not in training, not in doctrine, not in any briefing room or after-action review or leadership development course, but in 90 minutes on a mountain in a blizzard on Christmas Eve 2024. That the person you might be most wrong about is usually the one you assumed you already understood. That competence does not announce itself. That it walks up a ramp in the wrong gear with too large equipment and sits quietly at the back while people laugh, and it does not perform resentment or ask for acknowledgement or adjust its behavior to earn approval. It simply does the work. It simply is what it is, waiting for the field to reveal it, which the field always does. The field has more patience than performance ever will. That what a person actually is matters more than where you first decide to place them. And the placing is almost always done too quickly. And the cost of placing wrong is almost always paid by someone other than the person who made the mistake. He thought about her sometimes in the spring of 2026, the way you think about the people who change the architecture of how you understand things. She was at Georgetown now, studying international relations, carrying a GPA that placed her in a statistical category that surprised no one who had been in the Chinook on Christmas Eve. She was also, by occasional reports from people Merritt still heard from in the community, available for tasking when situations arose that required what she specifically offered. The reviews had been completed. The frameworks had been established. The arguments in the rooms had resolved in the direction that the evidence had always pointed them. 17 missions in the 16 months following Christmas 2024. Not all of them had required the rifle. Some had required only the judgment. The same judgment she had exercised on a mountain in Afghanistan, the judgment that could not be trained into someone who didn't already carry it. The technical skills could be built. The judgment either existed or it didn't. And in Maya Calloway, it existed at a level that Merritt, in 31 years of working with people who possessed it in varying degrees, had encountered precisely once before. Her father, whom he had never met, whom he felt in a way he could not have fully articulated to anyone who asked, that he now understood something essential about through the daughter who carried everything Ray Calloway had given her and had used it on Christmas Eve to keep 11 men alive. He had needed 31 years to learn the lesson properly. A 15-year-old girl had taught it to him in a night. Merritt picked up his box. He looked at the mirror one last time at his own face, in it older than he sometimes expected, when he caught himself unexpectedly in reflection, carrying what it carried, having been what it had been on its way now to whatever came next. He walked out of the office. The door closed behind him. The mirror sat on the empty desk in the quiet morning light, catching it, holding it, offering it back to anyone who came through the door and was willing to look clearly at what was actually there. Outside, Fort Bragg continued its morning. Trucks, voices across the parade ground. The machinery of a place that does not stop for the people who leave it, which is exactly as it should be. Still here, still going, as it would be tomorrow and the day after that.